Okay, and ready to go.
All right.
All right, we're live. Hello, my
Okay.
friends. Good morning. We are talking today about environment. The subtitle of this is sustainability. I'm joined as always by my friend Josh. Josh, how are you?
Doing well. Another gorgeous Sunday on the East Coast, and excited to dive into this topic with you today, Joe.
Yeah, I think it should be interesting. The East Coast and West Coast have very different like ecological makeup. And so I'm excited to share some of the stuff that's unique to this area with you. Um, let's start out just kind of going through what we're gonna talk through
Yeah,
today.
yeah.
So I want to spend a little time talking about Cowlitz County, give you a sense of the makeup of this area, and then some of the problems that we have to deal with. Some that we haven't already talked about. We won't talk too much about like the landfill. I think I also talked about the sediment dam a bit when we did our discussion around Mount St. Helens. So
Hmm.
won't spend as much time talking about those this week as we did. We did some of that last time. I want to talk about the role of county commissioners, talk about some other organizations and groups that are helping to think about this, and then round it out at the end with some community involvement. We'll
Hmm.
do a recap towards the end as well. But yeah,
Yeah.
let's keep going.
No. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we got a packed agenda. I think it makes a lot of sense the order that we're going to be working through this. But I guess Joe, at a high level, set the stage. Why should people in Cowlitz County care about this?
You know, I think when we start talking about the environment, it it tends to bring up whatever your preconception is about, climate change and things like that.
Mhm.
And I think it's important that we acknowledge a couple of things. One, regardless of whether or not you think the climate is getting worse, whether or not there is, man-made climate change as a result of our own practices, we do still have a responsibility to manage our own ecosystem. I'll pull here from a Bible quote again. For those listening who haven't followed all the way along, this is not actively part of my life anymore, but even in the Christian ideology, they're taught that it is man's job to have dominion, and I think for most of us, we recognize at this point that not managing our environment has long-term negative effects. We might not see those effects today, but even as simple as water quality, those kinds of things have a long term negative impact on all of us, on our community, and not just us, but those that come well after us. If we aren't talking to some degree about managing our environment, we are, in my opinion, being irresponsible. Um, I want to deal with this topic with the recognition that we're not all on the same page about what's happening, but at least saying we should care about this topic because we know what its effects are,
Hmm.
even in just a limited sense. That's why I think you should care about this, really.
Yeah.
Not all of us are going to become climate scientists. We're not all going to have dramatic impacts on the way that the world works today. But we should be thinking about this in so much as we should be planning for its effects. So that's kind of where I'd like to start.
Absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that. And kind of, I mean, I think you just dove into it, but I'm going to press a little bit deeper given what we covered last week and you sharing your own opinions,
Okay.
right? So, can you talk to me about how you generally think about this topic and why you think it's important to the community, not the general sense of why you think folks should care about it?
Sure. So I'm gonna preface this. I'm gonna share some of my own opinions here, but I want to say up front that everything I'm about to share is in no way going to cut me off from people. If I say something and you think that I'm wrong, I want to hear it. Let's talk about it. I've done my best to do do research, to try to listen to people who are smarter than I am. I engage with this topic pretty regularly in my day-to-day life. A lot of the stuff that I see on through the media that I follow talks about the environment, talks about climate change. But if you think that I'm missing something, know that we can still be friends. I'm happy to talk through this and get into more detail with people.
Yeah.
So I'll give you my general take. I think things are getting worse. I don't know if that's super controversial, but the reason I put it that way is because I feel like there is a flavor of denial of the situation that we're in that kind of bothers me. I do think we need to be optimistic. I think we need to be thinking about ways that we can make things better. But I think that has to come from an honest recognition of why things are the way that they are today and that they are getting worse. Over the last 2 years, we have seen a dramatic rise in sea level temperature, or in ocean temperature, higher than it's been in the last 30 or 40 years. And if you look at graphs, like they're going to talk about 0.5%, 1%, that is dramatic. One thing that stuck out to me, and I'll just share a little bit of why I think stuff is getting worse. Most animal and plant species are, I believe it is exothermic. I don't want to confuse the two, but exothermic meaning they get their heat from the environment. Exothermic creatures have a very limited range of temperatures they can survive at. Humans, I believe, and again, I hope I'm not confusing these two things, but humans are endothermic, meaning that to some degree we produce our own heat. Most mammals are this way. And so this means that we have a pretty wide range of temperatures that we can survive in. We can go anywhere from, below 0 Fahrenheit to, into the hundreds, and we can survive for a short while. But most animal and plant species can't do that. So a change of 1 degree, 2 degrees can be cataclysmic for these species. And so that's just one example of why I think things are getting worse, because ocean temperatures are changing. Now, again, whether or not you ascribe that to man-made change, or you think that it's the natural way that the climate changes over time, I don't really care. I mean, I do, in the sense that I hope we're all looking at the same material. Yeah. But at the same time, I think we have to be honest that things are different. At least in our area, I mean, our weather over the last couple of years has changed pretty dramatically. We can't really anticipate normal seasons anymore. We go from snow to rain to sun to, it's kind of wild fluctuation. And I anticipate that is going to get more inconsistent. All in all, around the topic of climate and environment, I am very worried about what's coming next. I think it's going to get much harder for us to predict how things are going to go, and that we need to be ready and have a plan for not emergencies. That's not really the heart of this, but we need to be prepared for change. This is one of the reasons why I'm passionate about getting involved in local politics, because I want to at least maybe have a chance to react in appropriate ways to some of the unexpected results from all of this. Again, this is not something that I don't want to be, pessimistic, but I think we need to recognize that things are generally getting worse, and we need to, with that, realistic kind of data-based perspective in mind, anticipate what might come next and plan for it. I think if we keep our heads in the sand and we say, no, this is normal, we just need to get through it, we are risking a lot more than I think we realize. So that's sort of my core perspective on this. Cowlitz County, I think, deserves that level of attention. Climate change does not feel like it's a topic that Cowlitz County needs to worry about, but I think we very much do. We are, for number of reasons. We are at risk of flooding. We have areas of our towns that don't have proper infrastructure to be able to self-support. So I'm just thinking about all of that, and that's all kind of rattling around in my head on this topic. I want to
Yeah,
be responsible with it, but that's where I'm coming from.
absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that. I don't see it as being pessimistic, Joe. I see it as being responsible, right? To your point, no matter what you believe and why it's happening, it's happening, right? And it's happening at an increasing rate. So again, I agree with
Sure.
where you're coming from, and excited to continue to talk about it. But why don't we take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll dive into Cowlitz County and the environmental impact that this could have there.
Yes, let's do that. You can probably hear Sasha scratching on the door too, so it's a good note to pause.
There
All
we
right.
go. No worries.
Okay. Okay. Let's talk about Cowlitz County.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a lot less knowledge here as usual,
Mm-hmm.
Joe. So can we start, or can you start by just kind of talking about the environmental makeup of Cowlitz County? What does it look like today?
For sure. So, Cowlitz County has a pretty ecologically diverse makeup, but about 83% of Cowlitz County is forest. So we are a very mountainous county. We have a lot of rivers, aquifers, river basins. There's 7 big rivers in Cowlitz County. We have the Cowlitz, the Columbia. The Columbia is the one that runs along the Washington-Oregon border. The Toutle River, which has 2 major forks, north and south. The Coweeman, the Kalama, and the Lewis River. There's one more that I saw on maps, but isn't really talked about as a river in Cowlitz County. It's called Green River. And I think it might be because it crosses up into Lewis County at the northern points. But it is mostly in Cowlitz County, so it's interesting to me that I don't generally see that listed as like a Cowlitz County river. But in addition to those 7 big ones, we have 157 creeks and rivers besides. So a lot of those are kind of branches off from those major rivers. But there's like Germany Creek over in Stella in the western part. Basically anywhere that is like lower to the ground, we have some rivers out there. And then we have like aquifers, so those are groundwater swells that
Mm-hmm.
we use to supply our own water, things like that.
Yeah.
A lot of these, if we're thinking about managing these spaces, it's about sort of where they lead into. So a lot of these rivers and creeks run into these major rivers like the Columbia and the Cowlitz. And so we're kind of thinking about them as being literally downstream. And so managing those and maintaining those is really important for making sure that the big ones are
Yeah.
not negatively affected, right? Um, there's a big water map that I think is pretty interesting. And yeah, it shows. I actually wanted to send you a link, Josh, so you could get a look at it.
Yeah.
See if I could get that to you in the Google Meet here.
Yeah. Let's see.
Here, I just sent that to you.
Yep, I'm opening it up. Okay.
Oh, dang it! I click on that link. Click on all layers and tables. No, dang it! This is not the thing that I wanted.
Yeah.
Ah, shoot. All right. Well, that's not going to work. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Basically, I mean, Cowlitz County is made up of a lot of rivers, and yeah, and 83% is forest. We have mountains. Three kind of splits in our mountain ranges. Oh, matter of fact, I'll send you a link to the comprehensive plan, and if you look at like page, I'll have to see if it's like page 7.
Okay. Opening that up.
Go to page 10 in that document.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see now. Okay.
Do you see that map? Major rivers
Yep.
in Cowlitz County.
Yep.
Yeah, and then so you can see that there's like this kind of intense network of rivers over on the west side.
Yeah.
The one that comes up like near the label of Cowlitz River, that one comes up as Germany Creek.
Okay.
And then there's a couple further west. You can see the Kalama River and the Cowieman River both kind of run out into the eastern part. North Fork Toutle and South Fork Toutle are the ones that generally deal with the sediment problem we talked about with Mount St. Helens.
Yeah.
And Mount St. Helens is over there in kind of quadrant like 8N.
Yeah.
Over in that section. So
Okay.
all of these run from the east towards the west, towards the Cowlitz River and then the Columbia River.
Mm-hmm.
So you can kind of like the county kind of slopes downward in a way from Mount St. Helens and down further there.
Yeah.
So
makes sense.
Cool. Yeah. Let's talk too about kind of the challenges.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, I'm going to list out just a number of different things that we have to think about, have to worry about in this area. We have problems related to water quality, but I liked how the Cowlitz County Conservation District talked about this, that a lot of our forest land is under economic stress. So the major threat to much of our forest land is the desire to expand. We have lots of areas that are prime for development, right? Especially those that are just outside of major cities, and the economic stress here is more in trying to maintain these areas that we think are ecologically very important, while there is a desire to come and build houses. Like we've talked about before, and I'm pulling from a lot of different conversations we've had at this point, but Cowlitz County has always had a housing problem. We've always needed some additional housing to support our population, and so with that, there's a constant push outward. You've heard terms like urban sprawl and things like that. And we talked before about how the Growth Management Act is a mechanism in the state of Washington to try to prevent that expansion. So there's this kind of push-pull mechanic that we have to think about. At what point is it okay for us to cut into land that is currently forested and use that for things like housing? And at what point do we need to lock it down and say, hey, no, you shouldn't actually be building here. We need to maintain this. In addition to kind of that as an overarching issue we need to think about, we have a number of other smaller challenges. So invasive plants and insects are one example. I was just looking up yesterday. We have things like what's called false brome. It's a type of, you might call it a weed, but it's like a thick grass that propagates so heavily that its roots create this mat on the floor,
Mm.
and actually choke out other plants. Interestingly, it is also very strong immediately after a fire, so it's wildfire resistant, which means that when there are wildfires, which we're starting to see a higher frequency of those in our area, the false brome is able to sprout before anything else is, and effectively stops it all from growing because it kind of takes up the space and like I said, sort of chokes things out. We have the emerald ash borer, which is a beetle that attacks, among other things, ash trees. We have knapweed, which is toxic to the touch. The spongy moth, which is native to Europe and is now showing up in our area.
Hmm.
Giant hogweed. So these are just examples of things that are showing up that change the natural, I'll say the current um, biological makeup of this area. I liked a phrase that they used. They said, a lot of the species that have grown up here are interdependent. So they've grown up at the same time, and to some degree, they feed off of one another or benefit from each other. And so when you have new species showing up,
Hmm.
and especially if they kind of kill off one thing, well, there's a chain reaction that happens because they're all interconnected. If one plant or insect or something like that is unable to survive, then there's a longer term effect on others, and we start seeing monoculture. Um, I'm
Yeah.
kind of like rambling a little bit on this one, but these
No, I
kinds of
think it's interesting.
yeah.
It's also, I mean, I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, because I feel like I could be overstating it, but also like just being such a major, your county has major ports, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ships coming in from all over the place. So I would imagine that fuels some of this, right? Is that, to your knowledge, how a lot of these new species are getting introduced, Joe, or is it like
Ooh,
more man-made problems?
interesting. So I don't know that there's a lot of evidence that our
Yeah.
port traffic is a cause of
Mhm.
invasive species. That's a good question that I could go and ask people though.
Sure.
Um, for example, there's that false brome shows up in Castle Rock mostly in our
Mhm.
area, which is not near any like major
Yeah.
ports. Um, so I don't know. I mean, I think some of this just kind of happens. It's really hard to keep track of where an individual plant might come from.
Hmm.
But for that reason, they do also have some recommendations. Like, for example, hey, if you're going to be traveling from somewhere, make sure that you like clean your boots off and things like
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I have to imagine that having a lot of traffic coming in and out of this area through ports would have some potential
Sure.
effect. I just
Yeah.
don't know that I saw anything immediately obvious that suggested
Yeah.
that.
And going back up to the top real quick, not to belabor this section too much, but water quality, I would imagine a mix in Cowlitz County of both city water and well water, right? As you move
Yes.
away, correct? And do you see water quality issues with both? Like, can we talk a little bit more about that? Is it like heavy metals, sediment, and what is it?
Yeah, so let's talk about sediment. Actually, I have quite a bit to talk through in this section still. So,
Yeah.
so sediment is one problem in this area. You know, coming off of Mount St. Helens, that eruption from the 1980s,
Yeah.
um, we have sediment that is coming down the mountain through the North Fork and South Fork of the Toutle River, and we do have hard water in our areas. So
Mm-hmm.
I know for myself, we live in an area that's in unincorporated Cowlitz County, and we have kind of thick white stuff that comes out in our tap water. A lot of what we have needs to be filtered. It's not necessarily hazardous, but it is still kind of concerning, right? And
Yeah.
there are areas of our cities that have historically had water problems through municipal water supplies. With wells, one of the things you have to be concerned about is digging into an area that is down upstream from
Mm-hmm.
other natural water sources. This is one of the reasons why building and planning, if you're going to dig a well, they want to come out to your property and see exactly where you're digging, exactly what your methods are. If you're going to be building a structure near a potential water source, they want to make sure that it is, I think, like insulated properly. That it's not being used for anything that could potentially contaminate the groundwater. Our water system is deeply interconnected to the point where even if you have a well on your own property, you are still potentially having an effect on the downstream water sources and down into the
Hmm.
cities and things like that.
Yeah.
I don't know what percentage of our county is on well water versus municipal water, but because a good chunk of our population is inside of cities, about 49%, I think, are inside of city limits. Um, I have to imagine that that is at least how many folks are on a municipal water supply as opposed to kind of getting their own. Um, we do have the Clean Water Act in Washington State, so there are some heavier regulations to make sure that we're not unintentionally damaging our own water supply. But yeah, like managing the sediment coming off of Mount St. Helens, ensuring that we have enough resources to inform and properly test things that might affect the water sources. Like those are all kind of part of the management of this topic, anyways.
Absolutely. Okay. I appreciate that. And
Sure.
I didn't mean to get us off track, but I was just
Oh,
curious.
you're
So
fine.
so far we've talked about water quality, forest land under economic threat, and invasive species and
Yep.
plants, sediment as well. What else? Are there other environmental worries or concerns that you have in Cowlitz County, or issues, I should say?
Sure. So salmon, uh, salmon is another topic that our conservation district puts a lot of focus on. This we have we have a Lower Columbia Salmon Recovery and Fish and Wildlife Plan.
Mm-hmm.
That's in collaboration with the Washington State Department of Ecology and the Department of Natural Resources. One of the things that's kind of unique about Washington is we have a lot of decentralized authority over these areas. So we have, I think we talked about this last time in the education topic. We have our Department of Natural Resources, which is to some degree directly managing land in our area.
Mm-hmm.
And they are also responsible for things like public lands. So the Public Lands Commissioner oversees the Department of Natural Resources and I believe the Department of Fish and Wildlife as well. And so uh, managing the salmon population is another kind of critical area. The county commissioners don't have as much to do with that, but it does require working with the U.S. Forest Service, the DNR, Fish and Wildlife. Um, and I think the only other thing that comes to mind is flood mitigation.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have a long history of flooding. If you remember us talking before about
Oh yeah.
floods that like wiped out half of Castle Rock in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So this is another area where the environmental impact is pretty directly felt. We have areas of the county that are prone to slippage, landfills, things like that. And a lot of the ground in Cowlitz County is pretty unstable. Um, so that means that the landscape can change very quickly.
Yeah.
It's all kind of a very complex and interconnected system, um, which is why I think some of the mechanisms we have in the county exist, just to help us kind of manage all of this. You really start to kind of wrap your head around how many different things you have to account for in managing an ecosystem, and even in an area like Cowlitz County, which is one of the smallest counties in the state, there is still a lot to think about and be conscious of.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Absolutely. Um, yeah,
cool.
and I mean that's not a short list that you just walked
Yeah,
through. So, I appreciate you educating me on the makeup of that and the challenges that Cowlitz County is going through. So why don't we take another quick break? When we come back, we'll talk about how the county commissioners can play their part and how they're involved.
for sure. All right, we'll pause here.
Sounds good. All right.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, Joe, as we were just talking about, why don't we dive into how the county commissioners can get involved here? So, talk to us a little bit first about high level how county commissioners have an impact in this area, the environment.
Yeah, so I want to focus on two, I think, kind of major things that the county commissioners do. First is the management of the building and planning process.
Mhm.
So this is kind of a regulatory function. The building and planning department is responsible for helping landowners and developers understand the regulations that the areas they're in fall under. And then the second thing I want to talk about is the kind of strategic planning process and a couple of the organizations that are involved in all of this. This is not just something that the building and the planning department thinks about. It's also not something that is just sort of passed off to state and kind of handed over to them with the expectation they're going to manage it. We have some local influence in these areas as well, and kind of necessary to have that. So for building and planning, we're talking here about things like zoning laws, building codes.
Okay.
There are a couple of different areas that the building and planning department needs to think about, but primarily we're talking about preservation of what are called critical areas. So critical areas are things like wetlands. We have fish and wildlife habitats and preservation of, for example, fish-bearing streams. Preservation of shoreline. So this is areas along rivers, for example, making sure that they stay, that they don't move around. There's also a category called frequently flooded areas. These are all lands identified in the Federal Emergency Management Agency's flood insurance rate maps. And so there's a 100-year floodplain. Sorry, there areas within a 100-year floodplain are designated as frequently flooded areas. So this is basically, I think, any area that has had a major flood in the last 100 years, which is a lot.
Yeah.
And so having those identified means that this is where people are allowed to get flood insurance, or it's recommended they get flood insurance, things like that. We also have geologically hazardous areas. So these are things that are susceptible to erosion, sliding, earthquakes, or other geological events. There's 5 major categories there. Things that are a seismic hazard, so that's earthquakes, stuff like that. Mining hazards. I don't think we have a lot of mines in Cowlitz County, but there are going to be some areas that are affected by mining activity from years past. Volcanic hazard. That's one that's kind of unique to this area because we have Mount St. Helens,
Yeah.
And then erosion hazard and landslide hazard. I want to distinguish those two because I wasn't quite sure what the difference is. Erosion and landslides kind of sound like the same thing to me. I think it's basically whether or not there's the influence of water. So erosion is things being eaten away by water. Landslides is like the ground is moving, and it's not
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
being taken away by something. So falling rocks and stuff like that.
Okay.
And then the last thing that the building and planning needs to think about is critical aquifer recharge areas. So aquifers are underground layers of water-bearing permeable rock, rock fractures, or unconsolidated materials where you can get groundwater from. And so these areas are critical because they have soils and geology that allow surface water to infiltrate and recharge aquifers. So you've got groundwater, and then you've got areas above where the water coming from the surface can um, uh, precipitate, I think is the right word for it, but basically soak into the ground and then refill those aquifers.
Okay.
So again, like I said, the building and planning department, part of their job is helping you understand, hey, if you want to go and build a structure on your property, what are the potential environmental effects that you need to account for? Do you live in a wetland? And if you do, you're probably limited in your ability to build on that land because we have already flagged this as an area with some downstream effects. I think we've talked before about kind of where I stand on on people's ability to use their own land freely. And in Cowlitz County especially, we talk a lot about property rights, about the ability for landowners to do what they want with their own land. At the same time, with that free choice, we need to have care and consideration for the effects of our choices. And this is one area where I would strongly stand behind the building and planning department, because their job is to make sure that, hey, if you go do something, let's just flag that it's not going to have any unintended effects on these natural resources. Let's say you live in an area that is a recharge area for aquifers. Hey, you should know, right? Like if you build a garage here and you use crappy concrete, it's going to seep into the ground. Or I'm not a contractor, so don't quote me on that part of it. But you do less than the best that you can.
Sure. Yeah, of
Um,
course.
and the effects on other people are going to be felt, right? And so we want to make sure that whatever you do, yes, we want to make sure that you can operate freely, but we also want to understand the consequences and make sure that we've checked our boxes, right?
Yeah.
So the building and planning department also has some guidance from the county commissioners. We have our comprehensive plan. This is not always referred to, but there are generally goals that we have for ourselves. I think we've talked a little bit about the elements of that plan in the past when we talked about agriculture and supply chain and things like that. But generally we're talking about trying to preserve things. It's not necessarily for the sake of holding on to those things and not allowing them to change, because of course things are going to change. But we want to make sure that that change is done responsibly, and that we are not setting ourselves up for negative impacts 30 years from now, 50 years, 100 years from now. It is really important that we think about things on that time scale. It's not just about how it affects us, but how it affects people that come after us. So
Absolutely. Arguably, probably one of the most important things to think about in this entire environmental conversation are the generations to come and the life that we're up. But yeah, at the rate we're moving, I mean, we're going to feel it too, right? Unless we're making some changes.
Well, and there's a couple of other mechanisms that we have besides the building and planning department. Building and planning is, I think, the most relevant to kind of the local level. But at the state level, again, we have like the Department of Natural Resources, we have U.S. Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Forest Service, Washington State Department of Ecology. These are all different groups that pay attention to different parts of this problem, right? In Cowlitz County, we also have the Noxious Weed Board. So a noxious weed by state law is a plant that is highly destructive, competitive, or difficult to control by cultural or chemical practices. And so the Noxious Weed Board is paying attention to these, these changes. We talk about invasive species, and I feel like people imagine, I imagine like a plant going, rah, but like they're essentially just like plants that are a little bit hardier, a little bit, they propagate a little faster, and they kind of eat up the space around them to the point where other plants can't survive. And so the Noxious Weed Board pays attention to this kind of stuff, and they do things like release certain species of insects out into the world to kind of cull the invasive plant species. They also hire like temp workers and things like that to go out and identify sites where these noxious weeds grow, and or these invasive plants, and then they do things like treat them with chemicals to get rid of them. False brome is one that's gotten a lot of attention. They have a whole kind of website dedicated to dealing with this problem in Cowlitz County, and the county commissioners control funding to this board. In 2022, they increased taxes to help support their work. They also approved a grant from the U.S. Forest Service in 2023 to help give them some additional money to deal with problems that are down at the local level.
Yeah.
We have our environmental health unit too. So this is part of the Department of Health that focuses on the environmental stuff. They collab with the Department of Ecology at the state level and our own local Department of Health, but they're doing things like thinking about the on-site sewage systems, solid waste facilities, solid waste disposal, wells, and then helping to improve water quality. And I think we talked about them a little bit in the discussion about the county health. But that portion specifically focuses on the environment and the impact of the environment on local health. Yeah, so I think like that's like a list of the different areas that the county administration has at their disposal to focus on these problems. And I think coming back to the main point of this, like while like climate change and the effects on our environment are definitely happening at a kind of macro scale, I think we need to be thinking about the county and the changes that we're seeing within our own county. We need groups that are thinking about Cowlitz County as a kind of narrow band, separate from what the state is thinking about or what the federal government is thinking about or what international agencies are thinking about. Cowlitz County has its own environmental problems. We have our own things to worry about, and so I think we need dedicated resources to help us think about this problem and how to best manage it. Again, to go back to something I said closer to the beginning here, I think that whether or not you think that there is a man-made effect happening, we need to recognize that things are changing and that they're probably going to change in more and more unpredictable ways. The last year and a half, I think, has really showed that. We're seeing breaks in patterns that we've not seen before. Yeah. And I think that we need to be conscious of that and trying to think ahead as best we can. So these mechanisms, I think, allow us to do that in a more specific way, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the insight there. And I guess, Joe, thinking about that, right? Thinking about what you were saying, happening at the macro level, kind of need to get micro, think about it, focus in for Cowlitz County and your county's specific issues. Totally agree there. As you think about formulating plans, strategies, insert buzzword here to help with that, right? Like what factors do you think are critical to consider?
Yeah, so the another one that comes up here is the State Environmental Policy Act, or SEPA. SEPA is a body of environmental law that mandates the assessment of potential environmental impacts associated with governmental decisions. So that includes like permits for private projects, constructing public facilities. SEPA requires state and local agencies to consider the environmental consequence of a proposal before deciding on that proposal. This comes up a lot. Lately, there's a recent discussion about a wood pellet manufacturing plant called Drax. And SEPA is part of those discussions, but SEPA was also, I believe, a pretty heavy hand in the discussion of building a new methanol plant in our area. And basically, they're kind of perceived as like the bad guys who come in and enforce regulation. But the reason that this environmental policy system exists is because, again, we're trying to control for the potential negative effects of a decision. We don't want something that benefits us in some ways and harms us in many other ways. And so they have like an environmental review process. You need to sometimes prepare an environmental impact statement if a project is likely to have significantly adverse environmental impacts. It's supposed to expose and document the potential impacts and explore alternatives to what you're trying to do. This is similar to the National Environmental Policy Act, which is a federal law requiring environmental review, but SEPA applies to actions taken by state and local agencies within Washington state. Its intent is to provide a way for agencies, applicants, and the public to evaluate potential environmental impacts together and try to find ways to avoid those impacts while still like doing the thing that you want to do. Yeah. One other that comes to mind here is the Shoreline Master Program. So as best as we can help it, we don't want shorelines to move. And so, that involves some feedback from local landowners, right? You see, potential erosion, things like that. And some collaboration with like the County Department of Public Works if we see the potential for some kind of environmental change to take place. We want to try to manage that. Again, I think at this point I've kind of talked around this a whole bunch. I hope we give the sense here. This is a deeply interconnected web of systems. We have both natural systems like the climate, you know, water, air quality, things like that, that are just kind of going along their merry way. We have systems that are maintained by individual property owners, their own changes to their own landscape, especially if we think about agriculture, which is changing things at a much larger scale than most people might do on their own property. And then we have these state mechanisms that are designed to help manage and control that process so that there's not too much change too quickly. This, I think, starts to get irritating for some people because they feel as though, and I think justifiably so, they're frustrated that they are bumping into all kinds of rules and regulations that they didn't know existed prior. I think this is why having an effective communication strategy is really important. Why we need to be available for people to answer their questions. Why, if you're going to go and try and do something, you need to have readily accessible information, because you don't want to trip and fall into something like this, like SEPA, this huge body of environmental law,
Yeah.
and then find yourself unable to do the thing that you set out to do, and maybe that you've already invested money into, right? So, anyways, those are the kinds of things that need to be, I think, considered when we're talking about environmental policy of any kind. Just all these interconnected systems and how we get the best outcome we want without potential negative impact, right?
Yeah, no, not easy, right? Navigating, like you said, a complex web of various different factors. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it brings us nicely to a breaking point here. And when we come back to your point there, Joe, we'll talk about collaboration and
For
maybe
sure.
how we find our way through these webs.
Cool. All right, we'll take another pause here.
Perfect. All
Okay.
right. Oh, sorry, I'm stepping on your toes today, Joe. But let's pick it back up and dive right into collaboration.
Sure.
So, as we're thinking about Cowlitz County, as we're talking about county commissioners, all these other departments and agencies that play a hand, can you talk to us about like some organizations that exist and are thinking about the environment in
Yeah.
Cowlitz County?
Yeah. So mainly, I want to talk here about the Cowlitz County Conservation District.
Okay.
The conservation district works voluntarily with citizens and other organizations. Their goal is to, I'll just read directly, coordinate the delivery of and maintain the district's capacity to provide technical assistance to landowners within the district, promoting sound resource management. So functionally what they do is they help advise landowners on use of natural resources and to guide, good development practices, use of the highest quality, to provide the highest quality of life for present and future citizens. So they perform a couple of specific tasks. One is technical assistance. So for walk-in or call-in customers, they're providing advice. What you need to know in your area, doing site visits, helping prepare conservation plans to make the plans that make efficient and effective use of landowners' resources. They want to assist you in some financial assistance. So if there is a way for you to, make a change to your property and maybe get some kind of grant for that, they can help facilitate that. I know one thing I mentioned very, very briefly earlier today, and I've talked about just a little bit before. The county has programs, for example, where if you're going to be doing something that is going to have a positive effect on the water quality in the area, we actually have some grant money that's available. So the conservation district might help flag that. They obtain funds through local, state, and federal grants, and then also things like contributions and cost share from public and private entities. The conservation district was originally created by request of landowners in 1945. And they started out just managing a very small portion of Cowlitz County's unincorporated land. That kind of progressed over time to the point now where I believe the conservation district has its eyes on every unincorporated part of Cowlitz County. So it seems like they're a mechanism for managing all of the areas outside of city limits, and a resource for everybody who doesn't have a city they can go to for help with these kinds of decisions, kind of developing plans. They have a couple of specific objectives. So improving water quality. They want to bring things within state standards. I'm kind of just reading off the list of stuff that they have written down. Helping to implement short-term practices to help with salmon recovery. And they want to do education and outreach activities to help develop everybody's general understanding about natural resource stewardship. And then kind of second to that, they're also doing like noxious weed stuff. The Cowlitz County Noxious Weed Board does a lot, but they are also working to help with that process and management as well. I've seen a couple of mentions of like surveys, so sending folks out to different areas to try to hunt for invasive plant species and identify where they might be. But the Conservation District is essentially an organization separate from the county government that I think runs up to the Department of Natural Resources and or the Department of Ecology, that is thinking about and trying to provide resources for natural resource management for landowners specifically. I think it's really important that a mechanism like this exists because as we've already talked about, this is such a deeply interconnected system. It would be very, very hard for somebody to, on their own, do kind of personal research and understand all of the deep intricacies of this kind of stuff. The Cowlitz County Conservation District also does work with Cowlitz Public Works. So they collaborate on like interlocal agreements like Silver Lake. There's a couple like Little Clamma River Road, Pacific Way, Rose Valley Road, where Public Works and the Conservation District have to work together. We're talking about like developing roads, making sure that the road development is not having a negative impact on the environment. And then they do a little bit to think about like dredging. So dredging is I think I'm describing this okay, but dredging is like going on the bottom of a riverbed and kind of pulling junk out and things like that, or maybe moving sediment along. And so there are just lots of different like practices involved in managing the environment around us. And so the conservation district is just kind of an independent body that is thinking about all of this stuff. They receive a little bit of funding from the county, but I think, like I said, a lot of this comes from state and federal grants and things like that. Um, Cowlitz County, I believe, put, as far as they said, Cowlitz County put $100,000 towards one particular project that had to do with, I believe, shoreline erosion, shoreline management. But that's kind of the largest organization that I wanted to talk about. Um, like I said before, in addition to them, we have the Noxious Weed Board, we have our own environmental health unit, and then Public Works and Building and Planning are kind of thinking about those as well.
Yeah,
I just looking through the outline realized I kind of skipped straight into the conservation district. So
that's okay.
it these groups all kind of work together to manage this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. And just going back to the conservation district, I mean, I would imagine that that's an agency that the commissioner's office partners decently with. You know, you decent. I'm not choosing my words
Sure.
well, but I would imagine that you have a good partnership with that district, or does it truly operate independently and commissioners don't get involved much?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure I have a great answer for it. In my research, I did not see a lot of conversation happening between county commissioners and the conservation district. Um, I think that they're probably going to work. My guess is that they're going to work a little bit more, kind of boots on the ground, like working directly with the public works department or building and planning, and not interacting with the commissioners as much.
Yeah.
Commissioners, I think, kind of step in when we need some kind of policy decision to be made. So, I can imagine the conservation district getting involved in a conversation related to a landowner trying to make some sort of change and appealing to the county commissioners for a policy decision related to our strategic plan, for example. But I didn't see a lot of cross conversation between those groups. One notable name, though, a former county commissioner is I believe part of the conservation district, a guy named Joe Gardner. So for what it's worth, there's at least one friendly face in that group. I think I have more work to do to understand the impact of the conservation district and the connection with the commissioners, but that's about what I can say from the bit of research that I've done so far.
Okay, perfect. Hey, that's fair. I respect that. All right. Well, I appreciate the insight that you have there. Why don't we take one more quick break and then we'll come back and we'll wrap up with how the community can get involved.
All right, sounds good.
All right, perfect.
Okay, let's talk about getting the community involved in environment and I think sustainability, right? Like as kind of the broader topic here. So, where do you want to start, Josh?
Yeah. Well, I would love to start from your point of view. You know, how do members of the community get involved in this area? Can you break it down for us?
Sure. So, I think that the most immediate way that you can involve yourself in building a sustainable environment is by learning what your responsibilities are as a contributor to this system. If you are a homeowner, if you own land, you have a responsibility, in my opinion, to be a good steward of that land. There are a lot of mechanisms that are available for people in this area to understand how all of this stuff works. But I mean, I think down to the individual level, most of our responsibility comes in just kind of recognizing the importance of these rules and structures and doing our best to engage with them. I want to be careful not to say like you need to follow the law. That's not the spirit of this for me. But the reason that these regulations exist is because there are lots of people who have thought for a long time about how we can build a sustainable ecosystem, how we can avoid making changes that have unintended negative consequences. It might be frustrating. Oh, excuse me. I got something in my eye.
That's okay.
It might be. Hmm, it might be frustrating to feel as though every step you take is being watched and monitored and that someone is looking over your shoulder to make sure that you do the right things, especially because I think we do want to emphasize the individual freedom that all of us want to feel in this country. But the reason that these regulations exist is because there have been negative impacts we've already seen, and we want to try to mitigate the potential for those in the future. Your responsibility is to be a steward of the area that you manage, and if you are trying to make changes, just ask, hey, what do I need to be thinking about here? For my own life, I've had to do a number of things with the small plot of property that we have. My partner does a lot more of the kind of land management in our with the property that we own. But we try our best to ask, hey, we're gonna go and we want to plant an apple tree in our backyard. Are there any like sewer lines or things we need to be aware of? And we'll get information from the county on that kind of stuff. You own larger property and you're wanting to, say, build a structure. It is important to have good permitting, up to date inspections, those kinds of things. The regulatory burden here is purposeful. There is a reason why we set these systems up, and it's to make sure that whatever changes we make are done with a full accounting of the effects of those changes, right? There's a little bit more that I think members of the community can do besides just kind of managing their own space. So, for example, the Conservation District has volunteer stewardship programs. You can be part of the information system. They do like planning workshops. They participate in like the Cowlitz County Fair. They want to build some cooperative efforts with folks in this area. And so you going to those places and asking for opportunities to learn for yourself, you can also have a positive impact on the community just by nature of sharing information. This is one thing that I don't know that I've always recognized, because for me, I really do love information. I love learning. But it's always felt to me as though that is kind of just for my own benefit. One of the things I've realized is that if I learn about these things and I practice communicating these things effectively, that can be a benefit to other people because they might have a challenge with going and learning all on their own. But if I can learn about it and talk about it, and I can do so simply, that helps them, because then they don't have to go and work as hard. Learning new things is challenging. And so if you can become an expert, if you can become knowledgeable about the rules in your area, and you make yourself available to others, you can help them understand something that might be complicated, and help kind of bring them along as well. So, like, I think those are just areas that we can each individually have an impact in. Managing our own space and being responsible with that, engaging with state and local authorities to try to understand what the rules are, being appreciative. Well, I don't know. That sounds a little too self-aggrandizing. Recognizing the value of these these rules, um, and then engaging with that information and trying to communicate that with other people. I think that's in a nutshell how you can get involved. We're not always going to be the reason why the ocean temperatures go up or down, but
Hmm.
at the local level we can at least think about what we need and try to involve ourselves. Just being conscious of this is, I think, important. While we do still need to make some macro level changes, we can do a little bit individually to help make this a little bit better for us. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's a very fair call out, Joe. And I think, we talk, obviously, because I just asked, but we talked a lot about how the community should take responsibility and how, there are organizations out there that we can join and being responsible if you're a homeowner, all of that. You talk a little bit, though, about how maybe experts in this space can be providing or what they should be providing to kind of help the community manage our environment.
sure. So I want to define experts here.
Yeah.
Experts to me are not necessarily people with doctorates and master's degrees. That is one way of defining expertise, but you can be an expert in something just by nature of having exposure to it. I know, for example, that I frankly have no business talking about the effects of construction on the environment. I'm not involved in that. I don't really know a ton about the way all of that works. And
Hmm.
so, if you do, you are by comparison an expert, right? I think that we kind of sell ourselves short and imagine that the knowledge we have is so narrow and specialized that it's not going to be valuable to other people. And so, the responsibility of experts, I think, is to talk about what they know. We really can't in today's environment. We really can't afford to push people off because they don't know everything about everything. Um, I think for this reason, when I talk about like expert involvement, what I'm really talking about is you speaking up with specialized knowledge that you feel like maybe nobody else has. We can't know what we don't talk about. And I think it's a responsibility for people who have this specialized knowledge to pipe up and say, hey, I've got something that you might not know. And we do have experts in positions of, kind of organizational positions, right? So we've got like the WSU Extension, we've got these state and federal agencies with designated responsibilities. Their job is to actually have input into this whole process and kind of manage things throughout. But at a local level, you individually have knowledge that no one else in the world might have. And I think that puts some responsibility on you as a person with that knowledge to share it.
Hmm.
I want to hear from people about the way that things work in their world. I want that input because that's how things are going to get better. If we aren't talking to each other, if we aren't talking about what we know and sharing it with one another, we can't collectively come up with the best system. I think that sometimes people get frustrated because they've been drowned out by people who make them feel bad for not having a university degree. And the reality is that you are probably more of an expert on your own local environment than somebody who is thinking about the state level or the federal level, right? I'll even point to one kind of interesting case of this, which is the National Weather Service. They have groups that do on the ground monitoring. You might be surprised to find out that The ability to monitor local weather is pretty limited, even with as much technology as we have. And so there are people that work with the National Weather Service and literally call in and go, "Hey, it's raining over here." There's bad flooding or winds or things like that. We need that kind of input. These systems only work as well as they can, and frankly, they can't work as well as they need to. So I hope that point is clear. Like the idea of expert involvement is not just
Mm,
saying we got to limit it down to people who are
yeah.
scientists. Science has its place, and it's absolutely important that we listen to people who have developed a scientific approach to these problems. We need that input from people who know more about a specialized thing, and if we're not all talking about it together, we're not growing and learning from each other. So
Yeah. I think that's such a good point. I mean, there's such deep knowledge. You can transpose that across anything, to the person who's worked at a company for 15 years, right? To the person whose family has been in Cowlitz County for the last 100 years and has grown up with knowledge and deep knowledge of the way things were and how they have changed over time. So I think that's a
absolutely.
really good call out. Yeah.
Well, and I think too, like um, it's important for all people who develop some kind of expertise to remain open to other perspective. I think one advantage of being in a kind of scientific environment, like going through a master's program, is that it's basically beaten into you how little you actually know. And
Yeah.
so, we need to recognize we have specialized knowledge, but also that we might be wrong. I try my best to maintain that posture in everything that I do. I have a lot of information in my head, but I always want to be receptive to feedback. And so I don't necessarily want to say that somebody who's lived here for 100 years is is an expert and should be treated as the universal authority. I just want to encourage dialogue and conversation.
Of course.
This all kind of comes back to me for one of my goals for my campaign, which is a more engaged community. I want to hear from people. I want to know what you know. What am I missing? Right. That's a posture I think is really important to take. So
Yeah. Well, as always, Joe, I appreciate your knowledge, and I appreciate your openness to conversation and continued dialogue. But I've definitely learned a lot today, and I've learned a lot about Cowlitz County. So,
cool.
as always, thank you, my friend.
All right. Well, we'll close out for today. We got one more of these left. So
Yeah.